deep beneath the ocean's surface, where abandoned oil rigs rot in salt-choked silence, the line between machinery and malevolence dissolves. You are miles from land, suspended over a lightless abyss where derelict steel groans with the weight of something that never left. Tonight, we descend into 3 true horrors from these forsaken structures. In the North Sea, heavy machinery vlogger George lowers an underwater drone into a flooded rig sump and captures clear audio of child laborers whispering his name through the rising brine right before the emergency winch cable above him begins to unravel link by link. In the Gulf of Mexico, mineral hunter Sarah enters a sealed chemical tank and finds a wall of liquid mercury sludge that mimics her every move until it steps out independently and blocks the only escape. And in the Southern Ocean, surveyor Jace's thermal drone spots hundreds of human heat signatures sprinting up from a subsea tunnel, not on any chart, just as the rig's generator fails, drowning him in absolute darkness. We were not alone out there. The rusted cage groaned as it swallowed another foot of absolute darkness. George steadied his camera rig against the mesh wall and peered down into the shaft. His headlamp cut a weak tunnel through the black, illuminating nothing but wet brickwork and a tangle of Victorian-era cables dripping with condensation. The air down here tasted of iron and ancient coal dust, so thick he could feel it coating his tongue. 320 feet, the depth gauge on his wrist flickered. He was close to the flooded level now. This was the Cap House Colliery deep shaft, a pit sunk in the early 1800s, sealed and abandoned for decades. The owners had pumped it dry once, back when small boys crawled through tunnels no taller than a kitchen table. Now the water had returned, a black mirror waiting below. George was here for content. His channel, Rust Revival UK, drew 300,000 subscribers hungry for industrial salvage. The plan today was simple. Descend to the sump, deploy his ROV underwater drone into the flooded seam, and locate a lost Cornish pump he intended to winch out next month. All live, all unscripted. He tapped the camera mounted to his chest rig. We are live in 3, 2, the red tally light blinked on. George summoned his on-screen persona, voice steady. Right then, we're in the deep shaft at Cap House, and I'm about to show you something no one's seen in 100 years. The cage lurched and kept descending. Water droplets fell from the rope above, pinging off his helmet. The shaft walls narrowed. Rust bloomed through the brickwork, like dried blood. The silence was the worst part, not true silence. A weighted hush, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you hear your own heartbeat. Between the cage is creaks. George caught something else. A faint trickle, no, a flow, water moving somewhere in the dark. The elevator bumped to a stop. He had reached the sump platform, a skeletal iron deck suspended 10 feet above the flooded seam. The black water below reflected his headlamp like a sheet of smoked glass. His breath plumed white despite the stale warmth. He stepped out of the cage, boots clanging, and clipped his safety harness to a cable strung along the wall. The drone station was already set up from a previous Rexy. A compact Pelican case held his RO-Vive tethered by a fiber optic cable to a monitor and hydrophone module. The hydrophone was his secret weapon, a sensitive underwater microphone that could pick up the creak of submerged timber or the clank of loose chain. Auditory jump scares drove engagement through the roof. Let's see what's down there. He lowered the drone into the water. The surface swallowed it without a ripple. The monitor flickered, revealing a murky green world. Silt swirled like smoke. Timber props jutted at broken angles, their surfaces furred with algae. The drone's light swept across a rusted tram cart, a collapsed roof fall, the skeletal remains of a leather boot. The chat on his phone began scrolling faster. Viewers loved the grim artifacts. George narrated softly, his voice echoing off the brickwork. That's a dram bottle, likely 1840s. And there you see that tiny pick head, a child's tool, half the size of a grown man's. The drone glided deeper. The The seam stretched away into a black throat, timber ribs bowing under the weight of the mountain above. The water was deeper here, 12 feet at least, and perfectly still. George angled the camera down, and the hydrophone is picking up nothing, really just the sound of my own cable. He dialed up the gain on the audio module. The underwater silence filled his headphones, a dense velvet void, and then a whisper. Not a word, just the texture of a human voice shaped by water. George froze. His thumb slipped off the joystick. The drone hovered. He cranked the volume. "Can you hear that?" Another whisper, closer this time. It resolved into a child's breath, high and light, trembling with effort. George, his own name floated through the hydrophone, clear as struck glass. He ripped the headphones off, and the sound continued from the external speaker, tinny but unmistakable. George, 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 a chorus now, 3 distinct voices, maybe 4. They overlapped, a schoolroom recitation from somewhere deep in the drowned seam. The drone's feed showed nothing, just black water and drifting silt. But the audio was undeniable, children's voices whispering his name from beneath 150 years of water. This isn't possible. He checked the cable, no interference. The hydrophone was sealed, military grade. It couldn't be picking up a surface signal this far underground. His hands started to shake. The chat exploded with all caps. Viewers spamming, "Is this real?" and sounds like kids. The water began to rise. He didn't notice it at first, too focused on the screen, but the sound of lapping against the iron deck made him look down. The black mirror was an inch higher than before, then 2 inches. The platform was flooding. Something's changed. George scrambled back toward the elevator cage, dragging the drone cable. The monitor flickered wildly as the ROV spun. He hauled it up hand over hand, the whispering still crackling through the speaker. "George, we see you, George." The voices had shifted, no longer a distant chant, intimate, as if tiny mouths were pressed right against the hydrophone. One of them giggled, a wet, gurgling sound that made his stomach knot. He reached the cage and slammed the gate shut. The floodwater was now sloshing over his boots. He punched the UP button. Nothing happened. He punched it again, thumb hammering the rusted steel. Come on, above him, in the shaft's absolute black, something pinged. A metallic note followed by a scrape. He angled his headlamp straight up and saw the elevator cable. It was moving, but not in the way it should. A single wire strand unspooled from the main rope, curling outward like a fern frond, then another and another. Link by link, the steel braid was unwinding itself just 15 feet above his head. The individual strands separated with delicate, precise pings, each one a guitar string snapping in slow motion. The whispering in the speaker turned to laughter. Dozens of children now, all giggling, all calling his name. The water below the platform churned as if a mass of bodies was rising from the flooded seam. George pressed himself against the cage mesh, chest heaving. The cable above continued to unravel. He could see the core of the rope now, a frayed white heart that groaned under his weight. One final strand held. He looked up at it, that single steel thread no thicker than a pencil, vibrating with tension, and he heard not through the speaker, but directly from the water beside the cage, a child's voice so close it might have been inside his own skull. "We were here first, George." The strand snapped. The cage dropped. Not far. 6 inches, maybe a foot, before the emergency brake engaged with a shriek that tore the silence apart. The impact threw him to the floor, camera cracking against the mesh. The speaker cut to static. The floodwater poured through the deck grates, foaming around his face. Total darkness. His headlamp had died. He lay there, gasping, pinned by the black, listening to the water rise. Somewhere in the sump below, the whispers continued, too faint now for the microphone, but perfectly clear to his ears. "We see you, we see you, we see you." George fumbled for his backup torch, but his fingers were numb and the water had reached his chin. The safety harness still clipped him to the wall cable. He could climb. The shaft ladder was right there, but he couldn't move. because the last thing he had seen, in the split-second flicker before his lamp died, was the surface of the water. It was full of small, pale hands reaching up from the seam, reaching toward the cage. The desert heat bled away the instant Sarah dropped into the adit. One moment her skin was baking under a Nevada sun that cooked the salt flats to a white crust. The next she was inhaling the stale breath of a tomb. The air inside the Cinnabar Queen mine tasted metallic, coppery at the back of the throat and cold enough to prickle sweat into goosebumps. She switched on her helmet lamp and watched the beam struggle against a darkness so dense it seemed to swallow light whole. The entrance timbers were bleeding. Not metaphorically, actual beads of liquid mercury oozed from the rotten wood, quivering like tiny silver planets against the grain. Sarah had seen this before in old cinnabar workings. The ore was rich here, roasted out of the rock decades ago, but the quicksilver never truly left. It collected in low spots, pooled in cracks, waited. She snapped a photo for her Instagram, Rockhound Sarah, 50,000 followers of her mineral hunting adventures. Today she was after something special. A rival collector had posted a find that burned her with envy. A cluster of scarlet cinnabar crystals, gem quality, twinned and flawless, pulled from this very mine before the EPA sealed it in the 80s. The entrance had been bulldozed shut, but a flash flood last spring scoured a new opening in the arroyo. Sarah found it on satellite imagery after months of research. She told no one. This was her claim now. The main drift sloped downward at a sickening angle. The floor was slick with a black paste of pulverized rock and mercury residue. Her boots slipped every third step. The timber sets groaned overhead, some cracked clean through, the roof sagging in a permanent frown. She pressed forward, one hand trailing the damp wall, the other clutching a rock hammer. The beam of her helmet lamp caught flecks of red scattered in the ore face, glinting like blood drops frozen in stone. Cinnabar, she whispered the word aloud, her voice swallowed instantly by the mineral hush. It was everywhere, veins of it threading through the gray country rock. But no crystals yet. She needed to go deeper, past the old stope, into the virgin ground. The old-timers had started to drift before the price of mercury collapsed. The stope was a cathedral of empty space. Her light failed to find the ceiling. Timber ladders climbed into the black at impossible angles. Ore carts lay on their sides, wheels rusted solid. And the mercury was thicker here, rivulets of it snaking across the floor, joining into shimmering puddles that reflected her lamp with an eerie, liquid perfection. She avoided stepping in them. The stuff was neurotoxic, absorbed through skin, and the mine's ventilation had been dead for 40 years. Her respirator was rated for particulates, but she had no vapor cartridges. She calculated her exposure like a gambler counts cards, worth the risk. The thought repeated itself with every glitter of red in the walls. Deep in the stope's throat, a side tunnel branched off, its entrance barely shoulder wide. Fresh rock, untouched since the miners abandoned it. Her pulse quickened. She squeezed through, pack scraping, and found herself in a blind drift that ended 20 feet ahead in a solid face of ore. Jackpot, the wall was studded with cinnabar crystals, some the size of her thumb, deep red and translucent at the edges. They grew in druzy mats, glistening as if wet. Sarah pulled out her chisel and rock hammer, positioning the tip at a promising cluster. She swung. The ring of steel on stone echoed down the drift, like a bell tolling. And then she heard it, a sound that did not belong. Not a rock fall, not a timber shift, but a soft, liquid squelch. Like a wet footstep in mud, she froze, chisel poised. Her light swept the tunnel behind her. Nothing. The mercury puddles she had passed sat undisturbed, perfectly calm. Just the mountain settling. She turned back to the crystal face and swung again. A chunk of ore fell away, exposing a pocket behind it. Her lamp beam plunged into the cavity, and something inside reflected back, not red but silver. A pool of mercury sat in the pocket, its surface so smooth it looked solid. She leaned closer, intrigued. Mercury didn't usually pool in vertical faces like this. It should have drained downward into the floor. The reflection was wrong. She raised a hand to test the surface, and her reflection did the same, of course. But the timing was off. A fraction of a second delay, a stutter she felt more than saw. Sarah pulled her hand back. The reflection did not. It remained there, a silver handprint floating in the liquid metal, slowly morphing into a fist. She stumbled backward. Her brain screamed contamination, hallucination, mercury vapor poisoning. But her eyes refused to lie. The pool of quicksilver began to bulge outward, forming a convex blister on the rock face. It stretched, elongated, and with a wet, sucking sound, a shape detached from the wall. A humanoid figure, slender and faceless, made entirely of reflective, rippling mercury. It stood 7 feet tall, its surface a moving mirror that copied her helmet lamp into 1,000 dazzling points of light. Sarah couldn't move. The thing had no face, but she knew it was watching her. It mimicked her stance, her trembling arms, the tilt of her head. When she breathed, its chest expanded in perfect synchronization. When she shifted her weight, it shifted too, one liquid footstep at a time, the sound a wet sklorp against the mine floor. She ran the tunnel, was only 20 feet long, the squeeze point at its mouth just ahead. She threw herself through the gap, scraping her back raw on the rock, and sprinted into the stope. The mercury thing did not run, it flowed. A silver tide poured through the opening behind her, reforming into the tall, mirror-skinned shape with a sound like water being poured into a glass. Her lamp beam swept the stope. She spotted the main drift entrance across the cavern, a rectangle of absolute black. Her boots hammered the slurry floor. The puddles of mercury she had so carefully avoided now splashed up around her ankles. She didn't care. The exit was 50 feet away, then 40, then 30. The thing was faster. It didn't chase her. It simply understood geometry. A tendril of liquid metal shot out from its body, hit the stope wall, and ricocheted across the space to strike the ceiling above the tunnel entrance. The silver liquid dripped down in sheets, gathering on the floor, and in the span of 3 heartbeats the mercury construct rebuilt itself directly in front of the drift mouth. Blocking it entirely, its featureless head tilted, mimicking her curiosity, her horror. Sarah skidded to a halt. She was cut off. The only way out now stood between her and this impossible, liquid mirror. She backed away, hand reaching blindly for her rock hammer, though she had no idea what good steel would do against something that flowed like water. The thing stepped forward, its footfalls soft and wet, leaving silver impressions in the grit. It extended an arm toward her fingers, elongating into dripping claws that reflected her own terrified face back at her. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, but with her own breathing, recorded and played back in a wet metallic echo. The sound of her panicked gasps emerged from its chest, distorted, stretched, as if a dozen Sarahs were drowning in mercury and crying out at once. It took another step. She stumbled backward into a rusted ore cart, the impact jarring her helmet lamp, sending wild shadows spinning across the stope walls. The shadows were moving on their own. She saw it in the chaotic flicker. The mercury thing cast no shadow, but the shadows it should have cast were still there, crawling along the walls independently, spider-like pools of black that skittered toward her across the stone. The thing wasn't just blocking her path, it was herding her deeper into the mine. Sarah understood with sickening clarity. It had been in the mercury all along, sleeping in the ore. The miners had disturbed it a century ago, roasting it out of the rock, spreading its essence into the tunnels where it coalesced, waited, hungered. The sealed entrance had kept it trapped. Now she had opened the door, and the only witness to what came next was 50,000 followers on an Instagram account that would never post again. The Mercury Maw widened. The figure's torso split down the middle, peeling open like a flower of flowing silver, revealing nothing but a bottomless, shimmering void where a heart should be. The reflections inside that void showed her 1,000 versions of herself, all screaming, all running, all swallowed one by one into the liquid dark. The wet echo of her own breathing grew deafening. She threw the rock hammer. It passed clean through the thing's chest and clattered uselessly against the drift wall behind it. The Mercury rippled, undisturbed, the opening sealed again, as if she had thrown nothing at all. The figure took another step, herding her further back, past the ore cart, toward the blind drift where the crystals waited. And the last thing Sarah registered before her lamp flickered and died was the sound of small liquid footsteps matching her own, not behind her anymore, but directly beside her, in the dark. The outback sun was a hammer made of white fire. Jace wiped sweat from his eyes and squinted at the monitor rig bolted to the tray of his land cruiser. The temperature gauge on the dash read 47 degrees Celsius in the shade, but there was no shade, just the red dirt, the salt bush, and the vast terraced wound in the earth known as the Iron Barren Pit. The abandoned mine stretched half a kilometer across and 400 meters deep, step-cut into concentric rings that descended into a darkness the noon sun could not touch. He was here to map what the government would not. A mining conglomerate had walked away from Iron Barren in the 90s after the ore price crashed. They left everything, the haul trucks, the crushers, the admin buildings slowly being swallowed by Spinifex. Jace's employer, a geological survey startup, had won a contract to produce high-resolution photogrammetry of the pit for a potential lithium re-extraction venture. His job was simple: fly the drone grid, capture the data, drive back to Kuba PD before the evening dust storm rolled in. The drone was a marvel of engineering. A heavy-lift hexacopter equipped with LiDAR, multispectral, and a forward-looking infrared thermal camera. The FLIR was his favorite tool. It revealed what the naked eye could not: heat anomalies, voids, hidden water seeps. He had found abandoned mine workings before, plotted them on government records that showed nothing. It gave him a quiet thrill, uncovering secrets the desert had swallowed. He launched the drone from the pit's southern rim. The hexacopter rose with a buzz that scattered a flock of galahs from a nearby dead gum. Jace watched its feed on a 17-inch monitor, thumbs working the dual joysticks with practiced ease. The thermal camera painted the world in shades of blue and green, with hot spots glowing yellow and white. The pit floor, 400 meters below, registered as a cold blue void, the air temperature dropping the deeper the drone descended. Grid 1, Grid 2, Grid 3. He flew methodically, overlapping the transects, watching the point cloud build on his secondary screen. 3 hours passed. His water bottle grew warm and brackish. The pit walls scrolled past on the monitor, their geology exposed in harsh, red-banded cliffs. Iron ore, kaolinite, a seam of white quartz that blazed under the sun, and then he saw it, a black rectangle on the eastern wall, just above the third bench level. Not a shadow, a void. The thermal camera rendered it as an absence, a shape that absorbed heat without returning any. He toggled to the visual spectrum camera, a tunnel mouth, perfectly square, timbered with old railway sleepers that looked brittle as charcoal. It was not on any map he had studied, not on the state survey, not on the company's own abandoned infrastructure records. Curious now, Jace broke his grid pattern and guided the drone closer. The tunnel mouth yawned, 3 meters by 3 meters, a throat into the earth. The timber sets marched inward as far as the visual camera could see before dissolving into ink. He switched back to thermal. The tunnel walls were cold, dead stone, but deeper inside, at the very edge of the FLIR's range, something registered, a faint smudge of yellow. He bumped the gain. The smudge sharpened into a line, a horizontal stripe of warmth running across the tunnel floor, not geothermal, not a water seep. It was too uniform, too organized, like a cable or a pipeline radiating faint heat. He guided the drone inside. The feed began to stutter, interference. Not uncommon in deep drifts, but the Iron Barren had no active electrical infrastructure. The generator that powered his ground station was a portable Honda unit humming 20 meters behind him. The drone's signal booster was line of sight, bouncing off the pit walls. He adjusted the antenna. The image cleared. The tunnel opened into a cavern. The drone's lights illuminated a space vast enough that the beam lost itself in the far walls. The floor was flat, swept clean, covered in a fine red dust that had drifted in over decades. And there, in the center of the cavern, stood what looked like a machine, a rectangular housing of riveted iron, as tall as a man, with pipes snaking out of its sides and disappearing into boreholes in the floor. A ventilation fan housing. Jace recognized the design from old mining manuals. A secondary exhaust shaft, probably sunk to vent gases from a deep ore body they never fully extracted. But it was running. The thermal camera showed the housing glowing a soft yellow, the pipes warm, the faint shimmer of heated air rising from the fan grill. That was impossible. The mine had been abandoned for over 20 years. There was no power source. Jace leaned closer to the monitor, the hairs on his forearms prickling despite the heat. He almost missed the second anomaly, at the very edge of the thermal frame, in the darkness beyond the ventilation housing. The camera picked up a cluster of hotspots. Small, human-sized, glowing white against the cold blue of the cavern floor. He counted 5, then 10, then 30. They were arranged in orderly rows like people lying down. The temperature signatures were exactly 37 degrees Celsius. Body heat. Jace's brain rejected the conclusion before it fully formed. A thermal reflection, a pocket of geothermal warmth, a nest of feral animals, goats maybe, or wild dogs, but the shapes were too regular. The heat was too even, and as he watched, one of the signatures sat up. His thumb slipped off the joystick. The drone hovered, camera fixed on the impossible scene. The sitting figure was joined by another and another. They rose without haste, one after another, like a congregation waking from a long sleep. The thermal feed showed their heads turning, all in unison, all toward the ventilation fan, no toward the drone, toward the camera that was capturing them. Jace's mouth went dry. He tried to pull the drone back. The joystick responded. The hexacopter began a slow retreat from the cavern, but his hands were trembling so badly that the feed swayed drunkenly. The thermal signatures were standing now, all of them, hundreds, far more than the initial cluster. They had been lying in rows that stretched back into the darkness, beyond the reach of the drone's lights. The cavern floor was carpeted with them, and they started to move, not toward the drone, toward the ventilation shaft, toward the surface. They flowed across the thermal feed like a river of white fire, hundreds of human heat signatures sprinting up the tunnel, up the shaft, scrambling over each other in a silent, seething mass. The flare's scale couldn't keep up. The temperature in the tunnel spiked. The drone's external thermometer registered a sudden jump from 12 degrees to 34. "Get out, get out." The words rasped from his throat without sound. He yanked the joystick back hard, commanding a full emergency ascent. On the monitor, the drone's visual feed showed the tunnel mouth receding, the pit walls scrolling past as the hexacopter climbed toward the rim. The thermal camera still showed the shaft behind it, a column of heat now, a chimney of white-hot signatures pouring upward like magma through a vent. The ground began to vibrate. Jace felt it through the soles of his boots. A low, rhythmic thudding, as if a convoy of haul trucks was driving up from the pit floor, but there were no trucks. The mine was abandoned. The vibration grew stronger, shaking the land cruiser's tray, rattling the monitor rig. Pebbles skittered down the pit wall. A crack split the dry clay at his feet. The generator died. The Honda unit coughed once, twice, and fell silent. The monitor went black. The drone, still hundreds of meters below, lost its signal. The last frame frozen in Jace's mind was the thermal image of the ventilation shaft mouth, now completely white, a geyser of body heat erupting from the earth. Total silence crashed down, no generator hum, no drone buzz, no wind. The outback was never this quiet, the kind of quiet that exists only in sealed rooms and buried spaces. Jace stood frozen beside the dead monitor, one hand still gripping the joystick, his breath shallow and fast. The sun beat down on his neck. 400 meters below, in the darkness of the pit, something was climbing. The first sound was a footfall, a single, distinct crunch of gravel. Somewhere down on the first bench, then another. Then 10, 20, a cascade of footsteps scuffing the rocky terraces. They were climbing the step-cut walls, finding the service roads, ascending with a terrible synchronized rhythm. Jace couldn't see them. The pit was too deep, the shadows too dense, but he could hear them. Hundreds of bare feet on ancient stone. He ran, abandoning the rig, abandoning the land cruiser. He sprinted toward the track that led back to the highway. The red dust sucked at his boots. The saltbush clawed his shins behind him. The sounds grew louder. Footsteps becoming a roar, a waterfall of human movement surging up from the bowels of the pit. The vibration was in his chest now, a subsonic thrum that made his vision blur. The sun went out, not a cloud, not an eclipse. A wave of red dust, finer than talc, erupted from the pit mouth behind him. It rose 200 meters into the air, a billowing, opaque curtain that swallowed the sky and blotted out the sun. The world turned crimson, then brown, then black. Jace stumbled, coughing, his lungs filling with iron oxide. He couldn't see his hands. He couldn't see the ground. The roar of footsteps was everywhere, surrounding him in the dust-choked dark. And inside that darkness, something brushed his arm, a hand cold despite the desert heat. The fingers were long, too long, and they closed around his wrist with the gentle, insistent grip of someone who had been waiting a very long time. Jace opened his mouth to scream, but the dust poured in, filling his throat with the taste of rust and old blood. The last thing he heard was breathing. Not his own, a deep, slow exhalation right beside his ear, as if the entire pit had finally emptied its lungs. Then the hands pulled him backward, into the dust cloud, into the silence, into the red dark that had no end. And now, as the silence of these forsaken depths settles into your bones, I need you to do something for me. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel that tightness in your chest. That primal dread of the lightless places where machinery rusts and something ancient waits. You made it through 3 true accounts of explorers who descended into the abyss and discovered that the structures we abandon do not stay empty. They fill with whispers, with reflections that move on their own, with heat signatures that should not exist. If your skin is still crawling, if you're checking the shadows in the corner of your room right now, then this channel has done its job. You are exactly where you belong. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because Mr. Whispers returns every week with new true horror stories sourced from the darkest corners of human experience. Share this video with someone who thinks they're brave enough. Leave a comment below telling me which story broke your nerve: the Whispering Sump, the Mercury Maw, or the Red Dust Suffocation. I read every single one. Now breathe out and keep the lights on.